What's up, Reef Fanatics? Welcome back to the Coral Reef Talk podcast. Today we are talking about Nano Reef aquariums. Levi, how's it going today?
Going good. How about you?
Doing pretty good, man. I'm excited today to talk about nano tanks. As you know, and the listeners and reef fanatics that have been following the podcast know that I have two 10-gallon Nano Reef tanks myself in my kids' room. And we're just having so much fun, like watching those develop and adding fish to them, adding corals to them now. But yeah, today I figured, hey, why not? Let's talk about nano reef tanks or nano saltwater aquariums, talk about what they are, the differences between having a smaller tank and a larger tank. And if you're brand new to the hobby and you're just getting your feet wet, maybe you do want to start with a smaller tank and just some of the benefits of that. So let's kind of break that down. What is a nano tank? What do you consider a nano tank? And what does that look like for someone they want to get saltwater fish? They see all these amazing aquariums. Maybe they don't have the space, so they want a smaller tank. What does that look like?
Yeah, so personally, I consider like a nano tank like anywhere from 30 gallons on down. And then once you get below 5 gallons, I start to consider them like pico tanks. For some reason, that seems to be like the new type of systems people are going for. Like they want a bunch of little pico tanks. They have some cool looks to them and they're different and they're rather challenging to keep, but we're going to break it all down for everyone's here today.
Yeah, well, now you have micro tanks, so even smaller.
Micro, yeah. Yeah.
So not only do we have nano, we have pico, and then we have micro. So
ounces. I mean, we start talking ounces at that point.
Yeah, so it's getting pretty wild with how small we're able to keep some of these species and just little tiny saltwater tanks. But yeah, I agree with that. Nano reef tanks usually 30 gallons down to about 5 gallons, and they're very versatile. I mean, you can put these like on a kitchen counter. You can make your own stand for them. They don't take up a lot of room, so that's really nice. You are limited at the types of things that you can keep in a nano aquarium, but there are some benefits to having a nano tank.
Absolutely. Yeah, so some benefits would be like, saving space in your house. Maybe you don't have space for a large tank, so you go with a smaller size tank just for space. And sometimes even a smaller tank, just the look of a smaller tank that's nice and clean and kept well, it looks very good and it's very appealing to the eye. And it's amazing really how much you can fit into like a small little box. Like, I'm not explaining it, but just all the microorganisms. I feel like you notice them more in a smaller tank than you do like a typical big reef tank. Like I tend to notice the copepods and stuff in my smaller tanks more than I notice them in my bigger tanks, because you're confined to a smaller area and you get to see more of those cool critters kind of zooming around the system.
Yeah, for sure, because you're more focused in, right? So you don't have this large aquarium that you're trying to look around everywhere. You're more dialed into what's going on. And I would say even maintenance is going to be easier because you have smaller system to work with.
Yeah.
And you're not dealing with large equipment.
Yep.
So
yeah, maintenance can be quite easy. Obviously smaller water changes.
Yeah.
On a lot of them, like 1 5-gallon jug, I can knock out this whole shelf pretty much and water changes pretty quickly. Just drain some water into a bucket and top off what you took out. So pretty simple there. It's quick and easy. Scrub down the tank a little bit if you need to. And one thing I would mention though for nano tanks specifically that can be quite challenging is going to be keeping that salinity, stable. That's one of the most difficult problems people run into in smaller systems because your water is going to evaporate and there's not as much water volume to take up, what's being taken out. So I definitely recommend if you can and if you're able to have auto top-off system in place, especially if it's going to be like a long-term system and you want it all set up nice and ready to go, unless you have quite a bit of time, to top off a couple times a day because a smaller tank, it's going to evaporate rather quickly and your salinity will rise pretty rapidly in a smaller tank. So yeah, definitely like an auto top off system with some roadie water definitely helps and it's less to worry about, because you're keeping your level stable and your salinity is going to be rather stable as well.
Yeah. So what are some of the pieces of equipment that someone needs for a nano tank? And I guess that depends on what you're trying to keep in your tank. But to your point, a nano tank is a lot less expensive compared to some of the aquariums out there. And I think it's a pretty good place to start, especially if you are doing your research. I always recommend to research like exactly what you want, how to keep it before you jump in and go out and do that. And also research the equipment that you need to keep the certain species or critters or animals that you want to keep. But yeah, looking at like a nano tank, I started with a 29-gallon tank and then I made sure I kept up on weekly water changes with that. And it was pretty successful tank. But as you get going in the hobby, I mean, you get addicted to the hobby anyway, and so you'll probably be upgrading tanks as you go or getting more tanks. That's kind of the nature of the hobby. But taking a look at some of the equipments, I would say lighting is important, especially if you're going to be getting coral. And there's a lot of smaller lighting out there. I use a Hygger aquarium LED light on my tank, so it doesn't have to be expensive. I know there's other lights like the AI Prime, which are good for nano aquariums too. It has a higher price tag, but lighting's important, water flow is important. And what do you think about like a constant flow in a nano tank, or should we be worried about trying to find a pump that has like pulse modes and stuff for like a 10-gallon tank?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you're keeping specifically or what you're wanting to achieve with the system. Me personally, I always like to have a decent amount of flow in the system. I feel corals do a lot better when you have quite a bit of flow. I mean, you can't have enough flow unless you're like pushing your sand around and sand's flying up in the air. So I like to keep my tanks pretty flowing, lots of oxygen exchange at the top of the water, and just like different kinds of flow. If you're able to find a small enough pump for your specific system that you have, it's nicer, to go with something that's going to, change up every so often, change up the flow a little bit, adjust a little bit, slow it down, pick it up. Just try to mimic, the natural environment of where these organisms come from. Because in the ocean, nothing's ever the same. You're going to have changing currents and changing tides consistently all day long. So it's always good to have some diversity and just different movements throughout the water. But if you can't do that, just constant flow is going to be totally fine. A lot of our corals and fish do very well either way, but me personally, I like to try to mimic the natural environment.
Absolutely. And you can also get hang on the back or small protein skimmers for nano tanks as well. Hang on the back filters.
Yep.
Like you said, auto top offs are extremely important. And there's a really cool auto top off thing that you can get that kind of attaches to like a water bottle, and you just put your RODI water in there, put that on the side of your tank, especially if you're doing like Picos 5 to 10-gallon tanks. You could probably get away with something like that to auto top off. But yeah, or keep a 5-gallon bucket handy, like one with your fresh water, and just make sure you're topping off every day.
Yep.
But with all that equipment, I hear it asked, well, one of the main questions you get is like people, they hear that it's very easy to keep a larger saltwater aquarium and that smaller aquariums are more challenging and difficult. How true is that when we're talking about nano aquariums?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing specifically is going to be the salinity in the smaller systems.
Yeah.
I think that's what people struggle with the most. And then consistency in a smaller tank is definitely harder to achieve than a larger tank, because your more water volume is going to be able to absorb some, like if you made a mistake or something on like your dosing like, alkalinity and calcium and that sort of stuff. A bigger tank's going to be a lot more forgiving. So you got to be extremely careful in your nano tanks about dosing, that sort of stuff, because it'll mess with your parameters quite rapidly compared to a larger system. So definitely, if you're keeping nano tanks, you're going to want to be on top of your game all the time just to keep something from happening. Odds are you are going to, have something go on where you overdose something, and you got to counteract that with like a decent sized water change. So I definitely think the biggest advantage, to having bigger tanks is going to be consistency and pretty much everything.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't necessarily think that a smaller aquarium is more difficult to keep. It's just how you maintain it.
Yes.
So, I mean, especially in the beginning of your reefing journey, I would say you're probably going to rely heavily on water changes. That's still a very reliable source. Like when you first set up a smaller tank, you don't really need to dose a lot of things to it, because as you're adding stuff, I mean, I guess you'll start dosing later on down the road, but in the beginning, you don't need to worry about that. Water changes usually replenish everything that you need. But how do you get started with a nano tank? Of course, you need to add some sand unless you're going bare bottom, but add some sand, add some rock. And I would recommend probably go with some live rock and live sand in a nano tank, because that's like the best way to get started and to get that cycle going. And with it being a smaller tank, you can get the live rock and the live sand relatively cheaper than you would if you were getting all of that for a larger tank.
Yeah, because you don't need as much.
Right.
So yeah, if you have that option, I definitely take that route. Trying some live rock, even if it's not necessarily straight from the ocean, but if you're like your local fish store has like live rock bats or belts or whatever, definitely use that. I think it's going to help your tank cycle quite a bit faster and just help establish your tank quicker than what a typical, like if you're starting it dry, it's obviously going to take quite a bit longer to get that bacteria, established.
Yeah, absolutely. And checking out your local fish store and getting to know them really well, because like you said, there's some local fish stores, most of them by us, I believe, they do have the tank where they're curing the live rock and they have that readily available for purchase. So yeah, you can pick that up there. Depending on your tank size, you get a couple of rocks, you get that microbiome started with that bacteria and everything. So very cool. So now we're going to jump into a scientific segment, and then we'll jump right back into nano aquariums. Levi, what do you got for us today?
So today we have my favorite butterfly species, or butterfly fish. This is the Poe's butterfly fish. It's an Atlantic species, Western Atlantic, specifically along the coast of like Florida, down into the Caribbean, even down towards South America. It's probably one of the cheapest Prognathodes butterflies you can get your hands on, and probably one of the most readily availables, second to the West African Prognathodes that have been coming in quite rapidly, especially recently for whatever reason. But this is probably going to run you about 100 to 150, maybe even $200 for this fish. It's a super hardy butterfly fish. It's going to eat like mice, little tiny feather dusters in your system, and pretty much anything else you throw at it. Clams on a half shell, Reef Frenzy. A lot of the reef nutrition that I feed, it likes to kind of snack on that as well. So super unique butterfly fish that you don't see too often. If you're looking for something unique and different, I consider this butterfly fish reef safe. So it's definitely a cool, unique butterfly fish. It does come from a little deeper waters than what most would come from, but it's pretty tolerable to like temperatures, so you could probably keep it up to like 80 degrees or so, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, super unique, super cool. It's a Caribbean species. I love Caribbean fish, obviously, so just thought I'd share that with you guys today.
Super cool. And what size aquarium would you recommend this fish be kept in?
I'd say like 40 on up.
Okay.
They don't get too big, but they like, kind of areas to hide and just kind of swim around in plenty of food. So I actually have one in this system right here. Well, wrong way, behind me, deep water. It's a 40-gallon system, but there's a bunch of stuff in there for it to, cruise around, copepods to eat constantly. And I feed that tank every time I get a chance to, pretty much. So it's constantly eating. It's nice and fat and healthy. So
awesome. Very cool. Well, Levi, I know you know about Printed Reef, and Printed Reef makes aquarium safe 3D printed products that, well, I already said it, it's reef safe. But one of my favorite products is this right here. This is the DI resin packing set right here. This is a cool little thing that you can put on the top. Like if you have an RODI unit and you're making your own water at home, sometimes you got to change out that DI resin, and getting new fresh DI resin in like that tube and trying to pack it in there tight, you're sometimes spilling DI resin all over the place. So what this does is it kind of has a funnel that you screw onto the top, and it helps you put that DI resin into the tube. And it has a little packing rod that you can pack it down into the tube and get it nice and tight and refill your DI space on your RODI unit. So it's one of my favorite products that I use from Printed Reef, but they make all kinds of things. They make the sand stand, as you know, that holds your coral on in the sand, where you just put your coral frag on it, screw it down in the sand, and they're just fine. No glue needed. Speaking of butterflies, we have the copper band butterfly fish feeder right here from Printed Reef as well. So there's all kinds of things over at printedreef.com/TheCoralReefTalk. And if you buy anything over there, you get a 10% discount if you use the code TheCoralReefTalk. So, I mean, how cool is that, Levi?
For sure. That's amazing.
Super cool. So go ahead and check that out, printedreef.com/TheCoralReefTalk, and you can save 10% off your entire purchase over there. So go ahead and do that.
Yeah, definitely go check that out.
All right, Levi. So you have some nano tanks that you maintain, and I do as well. So we're going to share what our tanks look like and kind of what we use, how we maintain them. So what are we taking a look at first?
Yeah, so I got two I'm sharing with you guys today. The one's pretty. This one you could consider a Pico. It's a 3.5 gallon.
Okay.
It's a macroalgae tank, so it's rather simple, to maintain. I got a little. You can see it on the side, a Fosban reactor from Two Little Fishies, a little reactor as they call it. I just have a little bit of carbon in there. I don't do too much maintenance on this system. Obviously, it's macroalgae, macro absorbs most of the nutrients. So I do a little water change on this maybe once a month or so, and it does really well. I got a couple different gobies in there, some sexy shrimp, Philippine peppermint shrimp, and just a bunch of assorted macroalgae, that I've collected throughout my swims around the Tampa Bay and Florida areas. It's rather simple to maintain. This one specifically, it's a lot more forgiving because everything in there is really hardy. The curlicue anemone, I mean, you see those in tide pools down in Miami and the Keys and like 100-degree water. So that's obviously a super hardy anemone. The sexy shrimp enjoy hanging out in there. And then the macroalgae specifically, that's all pretty hardy as well. So the hardest thing on this tank, I do not have an auto top off for it yet. I have one of those water bottle ones I'm going to try on it and see if I can get that to work. I've tried it a couple times and I can't seem to get it to just not drain out completely. So I'm going to try to figure that out here soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I pretty much just top this off once a day. The salinity stays rather stable that way, and everything's doing extremely well in that tank. So super cool and super unique stuff in there.
Awesome. And then you got this one right here. This is Elizabeth's tank, right?
Yeah, this is Elizabeth's tank. Another rather simple system. This is an all-in-one, so it doesn't have any like external filters or anything. We have a UNS surface skimmer on there because sometimes in a smaller tank you kind of get some oils on top of the water if you don't have crazy flow. So I have a surface skimmer in there that helps with some of the oils that may settle on top of the water and just helps remove stuff that's sitting on the surface, like food and other excess stuff that's floating around. And then it flows back. She has some bio balls and a sponge in the back to kind of help filter out some of the gunk. And then you got a little pump in there that's obviously circulating the water through the sump in the back right there, replenishing the water. What she has in here, she has some, I can't remember, real reef rock and just a bunch of random soft corals, super hardy. We got a sea bay anemone in there as well, another hardy anemone that's doing really good for us. I think there's stormtrooper clownfish, if I'm not mistaken, and she has a little damselfish and a tiny little cardinal fish in there, and that's it. So it's fairly simple. The soft corals also enjoy a little extra nutrients. So this tank gets a weekly water change, and the nutrient stays rather low, but everything's happy in there. Everything's doing extremely well, and I think it helps, obviously, to have, if you can, do an all-in-one tank. It makes it a lot easier. You don't have a bunch of things hanging off the side of a small tank. Right. It looks a lot more elegant and nice and clean. So
yeah, that's awesome. So you're doing weekly water changes, but what is like some other maintenance looking like? So I imagine keeping the glass clean, keeping the filter.
We have the two little fishies nano mags for these. Julian gave them to us. They work extremely well, and they're nice and small, so they don't take up much space. You can just leave them on the glass, and it's a rather strong magnet, actually, so it cleans algae off really well. Even some of the harder to scrape off algae, it'll get that off pretty easily. Other than that, changing out the sponge on Elizabeth's tank, we do that probably once a month, just to get all the gunk out of there and refresh the sponge. And a lot of people, I posted something about it not too long ago, and they were like, well, what about all the bacteria? I'm like, well, we have bio balls in there, holding some extra bacteria, and then you got the sand and the live rock and stuff. So that all helps. And then the surface skimmer in her tank, there's a little sponge in there that collects all the stuff that, it's constantly skimming off the top of the water. Right. So we clean that every time we do a water change. So that's about once a week. So that gets clean, and that pushes out a bunch of flow. It's pretty constant flow. It just shoots out, and it helps, the corals stay moving without some crazy, top flow, but quite a bit of oxygen exchange just from the return pump itself. So, but yeah, pretty simple. Everything does really good. Other maintenance tips, I can't really think of anything else other than, just scrubbing and doing the water changes.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. And here's one of the 10-gallon tanks. We added some pulsing xenia in there, trying to get some corals started in the 10-gallon tanks and get them going. So that's what this guy's looking like. And I'll go out to the wide shot here in a minute, but we have a tomato clown in there, and that macroalgae right there, that's like his little bed. He will sleep in that thing. He lays down and cuddles up with it. It's pretty cool. But yeah, this tank right here, live rock, live sand. I have a Cobalt Aquatics heater in there. I have the Higer pump right there in the top left. Nice. And then a hang on the back filter. And that hang on the back filter, all it really has in it is aquachar. And aquachar is biomedia. It's kind of like, it's not activated carbon, but it's similar in the way it will pull out like discolorations in the water, but you also can harbor beneficial bacteria in there, and they'll start to grow in the aquachar. So you don't have to change it out like activated carbon you take out every couple days or so. This can stay in there for months before you have to take it out.
Yep. Tank looks really good.
Yeah, it's doing really well. I really like the Florida Callirpa look in there. We have that skunk cleaner shrimp up there in the top right.
Awesome.
A lot of Astrea snails in there. Trying to keep the cleanup crew in both of these tanks pretty beefy to keep that going, so I don't have to scrub the glass as much. And it's really cool. how much the film algae in these tanks, both of them, has kind of been very minimal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
I think
really,
that has a lot to do with, like, all this bacteria and all the good stuff you're getting in that live rock that you guys put in there. I mean, that
yeah.
definitely helps out tremendously. Like, especially, like, I've noticed when I did live rock in the macroalgae tank up top,
Uh-huh.
and it, like, usually you go through a stage where you get a bunch of diatoms, like when you first start off your tank and you're running your light or whatever, you get like this big brown film that covers everything and it takes over everything for a few weeks usually, and then it just disappears, once that beneficial bacteria is able to, counteract that and remove nutrients quicker than what that diatoms and stuff can. But I didn't even have that in that system. I mean, I kind of skipped that whole stage. I never had any issues with much of any algae or anything either. And then when I started adding macroalgae, I mean, tank just took off from there. So definitely felt like I skipped a step doing the live rock.
Yeah, same here. That's been our experience as well. Like, glass is clean. There's nothing on the sand bed.
And you did live sand too, correct?
Yeah, live sand and live rock. Yep.
Okay, yep.
But yeah, definitely, it definitely helps. Definitely speeds up the process and like just
Absolutely.
all around keeps it clean. Because I think this 10-gallon tank, I cleaned the glass one time and it's been up for, I want to say we're going on 6 months now, something like
Yeah.
that. And then I haven't
Awesome.
really touched the glass and it's doing great. But yeah, in the last episode, I believe I mentioned this, but we just got a pitho crab for this tank specifically because of all of the caulerpa. And he's been doing a good job just munching on it and kind of controlling it. Because I do like the look of it. I just don't want it to like overtake everything.
Yeah, and like that's definitely going to help too, because I mean, once macroalgae, it grows to a point
Mhm.
where it goes sexual, like it'll turn like pure white, and it'll just release a bunch of like random stuff into the water, and it's going to pollute your water and stuff. So having that Pethos crab in there is definitely going to be able to combat that. Keep it trimmed up so it's constantly just growing off little new shoots.
Yeah,
So that'll be
absolutely.
definitely really helpful.
Yeah, and I should have added clips of the other 10-gallon tank, but in the other one, we have the mantis shrimp in there, and the crab that we have is, you're thinking he's a stone crab, right? And so,
I'm thinking so.
yeah, I don't want him to cause any problems, so he may be coming out soon.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, overall, the mantis shrimp's still in there. He's doing just fine. The sponges are starting to lighten up a little bit. Like
Okay.
some of them are starting to disappear. So I think I need to boost up, put some phytoplankton in there or something and give them some nutrition. But overall, the tanks are doing well,
That's awesome.
both of them. And it's real simple. Just a heater, a pump, hang on the back filter. And the other one has the surface skimmer as well. That's part of the hang on the back filter. So that helps as well. All right. So what else should we mention or talk about when it comes to nano tanks that is going to help someone who's maybe first time wanting to set up a saltwater tank? This is probably, with the prices of equipment and everything, probably your best bet money wise is to start with a smaller tank.
Yeah, for sure. And I
So
mean, it's really not too complicated. And I mean, as long as you keep up with your maintenance, that's going to be
mhm,
the biggest thing. Because I mean, like I said earlier, if you let a nano tank, run a while, like it'll be fine for a little bit, but
yeah.
eventually you're going to start noticing some things starting to occur because it's a smaller system, you don't have as much water volume. And like Joey said earlier, doing those water changes is also going to help replenish, your calcium and your alkalinity, just
Mhm.
keeping up with water changes, especially if you don't have like a bunch of hard corals and a bunch of other stuff you have to dose with. That's why specifically when I do like a small little pico or nano tank, I'm going to go with some soft corals or maybe a couple LPS, that are going to do extremely well and a little bit higher nutrients, but they're not as needy when it comes to a bunch of trace elements constantly being exactly strictly stable 24/7. So I mean, if you're doing like the weekly water changes and stuff, you're really gonna have no issues unless you
Mhm.
have some issues with the water that you're using. So I mean, I've seen people be really successful, doing SPS in nano tanks, and they just do water
Yeah.
changes really frequently. Their tanks look amazing. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind. Maintenance is definitely key on nano tanks.
Yes, for sure. And some equipment to have around would probably be, you want to keep like 5-gallon buckets on hand or 5-gallon containers. You can have like your saltwater pre-mixed, ready to go, your freshwater containers ready to go for top offs, things like a siphon hose to
Yep.
clean up in the sand if you need to, or even just to do the water changes. And then I always recommend having an RODI filter. I think it's a good investment no matter what size aquarium you're planning on starting, especially if you are starting a larger tank. But just being able to have the peace of mind to have your own water at home whenever you need it, or if an
Yep.
emergency happens, you can mix up your own water. You don't have to worry about if the store's open. You don't have to worry about, did the local fish store change out their filters? How long has it been since they've done that? And then like what's in their source water, you know, because you're making it your own water.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that's something that I always recommend, regardless of what tank size. I would say skimmers for nano tanks, you don't really have to have one. You don't really need to. It's like a proactive approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple companies that make small skimmers, for like little nano tanks and stuff. But like I said earlier, if you're keeping up with your water changes and doing your regular maintenance, that's definitely going to help out quite a bit. You won't really need.
Yeah.
I mean, I know like BioCubes and stuff, they have like little skimmers in the back that they incorporate. eShops has a really good nano skimmer. I have one of those on the tank over here that does really well. Gets the job done. And there's a couple other brands out there that do small skimmers as well. But I mean, if you're looking to get away with a little less maintenance for nutrient reasons, you can go with the skimmer. But if you're looking for a more elegant, clean look to your little nano tank, then I definitely recommend just keeping up with your water changes. You won't have to have as much equipment to keep that tank looking good, and you'll get a much better elegant look to it without like big skimmer hanging off to the side and
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Now there is a really cool nano DC controllable protein skimmer that I saw recently that I might look into. This guy right here, this is by Fiji Cube. Have you heard of them?
I have heard of them.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just like the way this skimmer looks.
Yeah, looks good.
So I mean, maybe down the road, if I go a little bit larger of a nano tank, I might try out one of these skimmers. It looks high quality, DC controlled, and it just looks like a nice solid build to a protein skimmer.
Yeah, it looks really good.
But yeah, not a sponsor by the way, but it is really cool product. But yeah, skimmers are optional. Let us know down in the comments below what size aquarium you are thinking about getting, or what type of nano tank you have, and if you have any questions around your tank, like equipment wise or maintenance wise, let us know in the comments below. We'll gladly jump in there and help you out. I know another big question around nano aquariums is like, what can I keep in a nano tank? Because sometimes you might feel limited because it's a smaller tank. What type of fish are out there, or even how many fish can I keep in a nano tank?
Absolutely.
I mean, I would say clownfish are good for nano tanks. Royal Grandma is a good fish.
Like different kinds of nano gobies that don't get too big. Yellow watchman gobies are always cool.
Yeah.
Want to do a little pistol shrimp pair with them. That's just a really unique thing. You can observe better in a smaller tank, because you have less space for them to go make a hole in the back, so you never see them again pretty much. What else?
Yeah,
different kinds of damselfish that aren't too aggressive.
Yeah, I've never been like a damselfish guy. Like in the beginning, I was like, I don't want to put a damselfish in any of my systems, but my daughter really wanted one, so we got a blue damsel for her tank. And dude, the blue of that fish is just stunning.
They're gorgeous. Damsels are probably some of the most beautiful fish you're going to see in the ocean and in the aquarium trade. Especially most of them as juveniles. They look outstanding, and then usually they get a little bigger and they kind of get a little ugly. But a lot of the ones you're going to see in the hobby, specifically like Springer eyes, the Bally blue damsels, a few of the other ones are going to keep that color for their whole life cycle. But there's a few that look really good when they're young, but as they get older they turn like brown or black, and it's kind of
but as far as how many fish can you keep, I mean, I would say look at your filtration, how you have that set up, and then test your parameters too, because
monitor your parameters. I mean, figure out how often you need to do water changes to keep your tank stable with whatever you're keeping in there. I used to have a frogfish. I noticed with that tank specifically, I was feeding more. You're doing more live feeding and stuff, and the fish is obviously discarding of that food over time, so you're going to have quite a bit more nutrients build up a lot quicker. So I was doing quite a bit of water changes in that system specifically. But I mean, with other things, it really depends on what you're keeping and what you're looking to do with that specific tank.
Yeah, like right now we have the 2 10-gallon tanks, and then my daughter's tank we have a pajama cardinal fish and a damselfish. And I would say we have some space in that tank to add a few more fish.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't want to add enough fish to where it is like super crowded.
Yeah.
Right. You want them to be comfortable in their environment, and you also want fish that mesh well together.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to throw like, 2 different kinds of damsels in the same nano tank specifically, because I guarantee you they'll probably fight to the death. I always try to go with like fish, that like stick to a certain level of the tank or that have a specific job in the tank, Like in a small tank, get a goby, that's going to hang out at the bottom of the tank. Maybe get some clownfish, mid to high level, and maybe a little chromis or something, or pajama, or some kind of cardinal fish, that's going to kind of just hover at the top or whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can, approach a tank as far as, adding fish and stuff, but I like to always have something, that's going to kind of fill every level of the system. Or like little wrasses, like 6 lines, possum wrasses and stuff that are actually going to help you with like, pests like flatworms and other different kinds of bugs that you're going to get in your system.
Yeah, that's super good advice. So when it comes to nano tanks, some of the most important things you got to worry about: salinity, like you talked about, evaporation, so make sure you're topping it off. And what else do you have to add for keeping nano tanks?
I mean, I think we touched on most of it. Lighting, you don't need anything crazy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of the tanks that I have, I got a little Fluval smart light for the macroalgae tank, and I think it's running quite literally at like 30% for the macroalgae, and everything's doing really good. I don't get much algae growth on the glass. And then on the Elizabeth's tank, we got one of the little AI blades. Gets the job done really well, and I think that's running at like maybe 30 to 40%. A lot of the soft corals, come from deeper waters, most of them. So they do really well with the lower light, and they're doing extremely well. Just, get a little more color in there because she really appreciates seeing the different colored corals. But we'll see.
Yeah, no, that's cool. But while you were talking about that, I looked up the price of that Higer light that I mentioned earlier. Okay. And let me see if I can share the screen here. And it's actually only $40. So it's a pretty good price and it's been working out really well in the 10-gallon tanks.
Awesome.
So I'm excited to add more corals to the system and see how that grows corals.
Yeah.
I've had a few people ask about that, but yeah, it's doing really, really well.
Awesome.
So, okay, I think we touched on everything.
Yeah, so.
Briefly talked about how to start a tank. There's really not a whole lot of equipment to deep dive into. There's a lot of basic stuff. Water changes is pretty much the way to go.
Yep. I think we're good.
All right. So if you are looking to get a Nano Reef aquarium, we just wanted to give you a few helpful tips as to like how to get started with it, what aquarium you should, or what equipment you should have for your nano aquarium, and just how to maintain a Nano Reef tank. It's not as hard as people may make it out to be. So you can definitely keep one. And if you're excited about jumping into saltwater tanks, definitely try out a smaller tank first to get your feet wet, and you can have a ton of fun. It's not as limited as people say it is. There's a ton of smaller fish and a ton of awesome things that you can keep in a nano tank.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for watching or listening to the Coral Reef Talk podcast, wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you for checking it out here on YouTube, the video podcast format. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you.